All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today for the University of Minnesota Humphrey School of Public Affairs webinar entitled Election Security Preparing for 2020. My name is Doug Chapin. I am Director of Elections Research at Forest Marsh Group in Arlington, Virginia, but also founder and program faculty of the university's Certificate in Election Administration program. Really grateful that we have two fantastic guests today to talk about the very important topic of election security. Judd Choate, State Election Director of Colorado, and Matt Masterson, Senior Cybersecurity Advisor at the Department of Homeland Security. Before I turn the program over to them, just want to go over a couple of really brief housekeeping announcements for today's webinar. So to the right of your screen, you will see a list of attendees and panelists, including yourself. For the time being, attendees are muted, but if you want to raise your hand or somehow let us know that you're there, the opportunity to do so is in that panel. Also, you will see a Q&A panel in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. That will be your opportunity throughout the webinar to ask questions of the panelists. Just to let you know, what we'll do is we'll collect those throughout and then save a good chunk of time at the end of the webinar to answer those questions. We may end up grouping similar questions so that I can get through as many of them as possible, but if you have any questions throughout the event today, please do send them along and we'll do our best to get to as many of them as we can by the end of today's session. You'll also, throughout today's session, be asked to participate in a number of different polls. Our panelists have some things that they'd like to know about you or about what you know about the topics that we'll be discussing. Those will also pop up in that right rail next to the screen. You can make your choices. Some of them are one only, some of them are, you can choose multiple answers. When you're done, submit. These typically have relatively short running times, so if you are going to participate, please try to do so relatively quickly. And then we'll push out those results so that you can see how everyone on the call voted. So let's go ahead. Kate, you want to push out the first poll before we get to Judd? And that's just a quick, how did you hear about us today? And while you all are responding to that, let me go ahead and introduce our first guest, Judd Choate, Director of Elections for the state of Colorado. Folks who work in the field of elections know and recognize Judd as a leader, not just in Colorado, but across the country. Judd has been a leading voice for state and local election officials for many years, recognized by his peers with leadership positions at the National Association of State Election Directors, and currently serving as a member of the National Government Coordinating Council under the Critical Infrastructure designation for elections infrastructure. Judd, we're also happy to announce, is working with us here at the University of Minnesota to help us build out our election security and cybersecurity offerings. Will be helping us build at least one and maybe more courses that will then form a new subcategory of specialty within the university's Certificate in Election Administration. And we'll tell you more about that a little bit later. With that, let me turn it over to Judd. Thanks for being here, Judd, and the floor is yours.
Hey, thanks, Doug. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Judd Choate. I'm the State Election Director for Colorado. I'm going to talk to you about the major election security areas other than cybersecurity. Matt's going to cover that, so he gets to do all the cool stuff. Basically, it's 1973, I'm Jethro Tull, and he's the Rolling Stones. You have to sit through 20 minutes of me to get to him. I guess the good news is I promise not to play the flute. The security measures that I'm going to discuss are really very important, both in terms of literally protecting your elections and your constituents' information, as well as instilling trust in elections. For the most part, these are areas you're already aware of, but we can always do better. Let's start with physical security. So the importance of physical security, you can see that slide there. Physical security and all the election functions that incorporate that security are really very important for two major reasons. Those jurisdictions that do a good job of securing their equipment, logging changes, auditing the use of their equipment, reduce the number and scope of cybersecurity vulnerabilities, thus reducing the likelihood that they will suffer a cybersecurity incident. So it all starts with the way that you protect your systems and equipment, and physical security is the precursor to all the cybersecurity protections that Matt's going to discuss in the second half of this program. And then the second thing is whether you have a security incident or not, every election official must be able to discuss election security to candidates, to political parties, to the press, to the public. You might even need to explain it to a court if you get into a really close election. So understanding how you protect your systems and equipment can be the difference between instilling trust that you ran a great election or creating doubt in your election outcome. So what I'm going to talk about is physical security on a number of different levels. Going to talk about equipment, seals, chain of custody, logs, and then logic and accuracy tests and audits. Also going to talk about creating a culture of security, both in creating good security plans and then continuity of operations, and then building security into your contracts. And then finally, I'm going to end on training. So I wanted to introduce a poll here just to better understand who's out in our audience, so I can get a sense about your role in elections. Are you a county or local official, a state election official, maybe even a federal election official? I saw that we had a couple of EAC employees on the webinar. Or if you work in the election vendor world, or potentially other possible connections to elections. So go ahead and click the appropriate answer, and I'm curious to hear what people have to say. We'll jump back to that here in a second. The next thing I wanted to do was to introduce a question that sort of gets us started with thinking about physical security. So if we could see the answer to the position question, I'm curious to know who people are. Or not. So Kate, do you have the answers to that first question, the position question? All right, I'm not going to worry about that. Let's just, there we go. So over half of the people on the call are either county or local election officials. We do have a couple of state folks, 2 federal election officials. I spotted you both when I was looking at the list. Some people from the election vendor community, and then several others. That's interesting. Okay, so the next poll I wanted you to think about is, how would you characterize your office's physical security right now with your election equipment and systems? So as you're answering that, why don't we get started, and I'll kind of run through some of the things that we're going to talk about. So physical security. So when you're talking about physical security, you're talking about a number of different things as they apply to both your equipment and your systems. The first thing, obviously physical, is that you have secured your equipment. Is it under lock and key? Do you have video surveillance? Is that video surveillance being kept as an elections record? Those are all really very important ideas, and if you're not doing them now, you really should be considering doing those. Also, election official access to that equipment. So if you have a keypad entry, is it being changed occasionally so that if others are involved in that, they would have limited access? If you have card entry, are you confirming that employee list that can get in with those cards? And then if people change positions or leave your office, are you terminating that access? So those are all really very important questions to answer. Just out of curiosity, can we see the, yes, good. So it seems like for the most part, people think of their security as being excellent or very good or in the good category. Only 2 people said poor. I guess that's good, although it's bad that they're poor. But hopefully after some of this, it won't be poor anymore. Some other things to think about on the physical security front. Trusted build. So what is trusted build? That's the trusted software that your equipment uses to do its major functions. That's software that's been tested, in many cases certified, and is the basis for its proper usage. It's going to operate properly because of that software. It's not as vulnerable to outside influence. So what equipment should require trusted build? That should be on your voting equipment, your ballot marking devices, your voter activation cards, that piece of equipment, and then tabulation computers and scanners. And then who should be doing your trusted build? So this is a little tougher, and I do understand that this is something we do in Colorado that maybe not everybody is able to do. But really, those who install trusted build should be people who are trained. We strongly recommend that you do not use employees from vendors to install trusted build. It creates some real problems. A great example of that is they may very well be installing different versions of the same software on different equipment across your state. So if you want to make sure you're always dealing with the same version across all of your jurisdictions, so that's really something to think about. So if you are a county or local election official and you're sort of supervising that trusted build process, you want to be communicating with your state to make sure you've got the right version and you're installing that version in a way that guarantees that you've got the proper version on your hardware. We recommend that states do not use the U.S. Postal Service or FedEx. These are all about, instilling and maintaining trust, because at the end of the day, whether your equipment operates properly or not, the people have to trust that the equipment has the right version and is doing its job properly. Also in Colorado, we do affidavits. So each time a new trusted build version goes out, we certify that it's the new version, and we ask that that trusted build affidavit be kept with the equipment, and then you keep the past versions on file. So if you have to go back and look at a past election and with a prior version, you've always got it there. Other things you might be concerned about are seals. So I really like this picture. This is of the Afghanistan election in 2017, and you can see that they've got all of their ballots, as appear to be ballots, in their crates, all sealed up just like we do. So many of the kinds of things we're doing in U.S. elections are also being duplicated around the country or around the world. So sealing election materials, so all the equipment that requires trusted build should also be properly sealed. These are, I've got 2 examples of a seal there. One is a seal that is magnetic, and another one is the loop. Depending upon the way in which you're sealing, you might want to use one or both. You want to do these on ballot boxes, on transport crates, and you may have the need for several seals on one item. So you can see a piece of voting equipment, you might have the thumb drive, the key entry, a number of different, maybe where all the bolts are so that it can be not be opened. So a number of different places would potentially have a seal. Each one of those are different, each one has a number, and for that reason you need to keep a good chain of custody. So this is an example of Boulder County, Colorado. their 2014 general election, they had ballot transport logs. These ballot transport logs show the number of the seal, where they were coming from, where they were going to, what time that occurred, and then 2 signatures. So from when they entered and when they left, or and then in some cases multiple people. So that's a really good way to do your chain of custody, to keep track of your seals and logs. So chain of custody. Hillary Rudy, who's the Deputy State Election Director for Colorado, has this great phrase, which I'm going to steal right now. It's a good chain of custody is evidence of absence of alteration, which I just think that really captures it. So every time you break a seal, every time you move equipment, every time that equipment leaves your control, you should create a chain of custody so that you know when that piece of equipment left and when it re-entered, and you don't have a gap in that process. So you log the seal number, the date, even the minute, AM, PM, and who signs that? Well, we recommend that you have 2 people sign it, so that every time something like that happens, you've got 2 people's word on it. Those can be employees. It's also a really good idea to do a bipartisan team. I've got a picture there of a bipartisan team working together. That's a great way to do it. Other types of logs you might want to be keeping, maintenance logs, so any equipment that needs maintenance, especially if it leaves your control. Transportation logs, these are sort of your ballot container seals, when your equipment is set up or torn down. Access logs, so anyone entering a secure area, and then use your key card for everybody who enters. So if you've got one of those pads where everybody scans their key card to go in, don't just have one person do it and then 5 people go in with them. Each person should submit their card to that, so then you know who's in what area at all times. It's just a very good practice. I travel around Colorado quite a bit. Whenever I go to a county and I go into their secure area and they make me sign in on an access log, I always feel like that's a county that's trying their best to do their proper logging. And then the last thing is for your logic and accuracy test prior to election. So this is where you test your equipment prior to an election to make sure it's functioning properly. And then your post-election audits. So let me go into that in a little bit more detail. That picture right there is from the 2017 risk limiting audit that we did statewide. Pretty proud of that picture. I took that. That's Secretary Williams, who's our former Secretary of State. In the front row, you can see Jennifer Morrell, and I think that's Rob Rock from Rhode Island. If you want to know more about risk limiting audits, Jennifer Morrell is a great resource. She just released a couple of different books on that from the Democracy Fund. Okay, logic and accuracy testing. This is where you're testing your equipment prior to its usage to make sure it's functioning the way that it should function, the way it's tabulating votes properly. So here are some protocols. Prior to any use, you should be doing an LAT. That test, you should test every scenario. So you should fill out ballots that are testing each one of the boxes so that you, when you submit that or when you run it through your equipment, you can see that it's catching all of the votes properly. These tests should be conducted by your election judges or your employees if that's the way you do it in your county. You can also use your canvas board. That's one of the ways that we do it here in Colorado. Logic and accuracy testing should be done in public. We always invite party officials and candidates to be in attendance as well, just so that they understand that that equipment has been tested prior to that election. And then those test materials should be maintained as an election record, because again, if you find yourself in a fight after the election and you're in front of a judge, you can show, hey, we ran 200 ballots through this machine where we tested every single possibility, and we can feel pretty confident that this machine was operating properly. Here's an excellent resource on that. Washington State has a little protocol on how you conduct an LAT, which I thought was especially informative. Audits. So many states do election audits, but not all. So why should you be doing post-election audits? These are great ways to find problems with your software or hardware after an election. You might even pull a piece of hardware out of an election because you've had complaints about it. That's a great time to go ahead and audit some of the ballots that were run through that hardware. It's a great deterrent against fraud. If people know that you're auditing they're less likely to try to commit fraud. It can also mitigate the need for a full recount. That's one of the things that we have in our law, and it can be an excellent way to do that in other states and other jurisdictions, is to say, hey, we don't really need to do a full recount except if we meet these very specific conditions, because we do LATs and we do audits. And it can help you identify who actually won an election. Well, that's revolutionary. Of course, you want to, of course, after an election, have great faith that the right person was declared the winner, and an audit can get you that sort of level of faith. A couple of great resources here. Wiki's got this very expansive election audit page, which describes all the various ways, sort of vanilla to rocky road, to do an elections audit. Colorado does risk limiting audits. That would be the rocky road version. And if you want to know more about risk limiting audits, you can look at our audit center, or like I say, go and look at Jennifer Morell's booklets that she just released. Okay, so I just went through a whole bunch of physical security. Now, thinking about the things that I just talked about, you know, how would you characterize your physical security having had that conversation? This could make you feel really good. Hey, we do all these things, and so maybe we're excellent. It could also make you start thinking about some other things that you could do to improve the quality of your physical security. So I'll let you do that poll. Excuse me. And we'll start to move on to another area, and then we'll come back and look at our poll results. So planning. So the various kinds of ways in which you can prepare, both security-wise and then contingency-wise, for improving and maintaining your elections through difficult circumstances is really important. So one of the things that I recommend is that you develop a security plan. So if you're a state official, your state office should really develop a checklist to ensure that your local jurisdictions are prioritizing security in each one of their major election activities. And if you are a county or a local election official, and if your state doesn't require a checklist, go ahead and develop your own. Looking at our results there, it looks like, well, unfortunately, it looks like we moved from excellent to very good. So it sounds like there were some things that maybe you became aware of in those first couple of slides that maybe we could incorporate into future elections. So that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing to do. Another thing on the security plan side is to be prepared for any kind of event that potentially could upend your election. So this might be a continuity of operations plan, a COOP, or doing some contingency planning on narrower areas. A couple of great resources on this. Wisconsin has a great disaster plan that that we actually sort of parroted a little bit in Colorado, and then you can also link to Colorado's disaster plan, which I think is quite good. This is going to be really hard to read. My apologies. So you'll have to like get really close to your screen. But I wanted to give you an example of our security plan in Colorado. It's an 8-page plan that every county has to do in preparation for a major election. And you can see you have to fill out what county it is, who you are, who's the contact person, and then a bunch of little info about, you know, what kind of equipment you use. Are you prepared for this? Can you give us some attachments that include this information and that information? Gives you a real sense about how a county or local jurisdiction is actually operating that election. And then it goes into specific areas. So are you doing physical locking and mechanisms and using the proper seals? Are you creating secure access points for your equipment and for your ballots? And what are your internal controls for voting systems? And that's just in the first couple of pages. It keeps going on into other areas of security as well. So this is something, kind of an example of the way in which you could do a security plan. And like I say, if your state doesn't do these, you should maybe create one for your county. So what is a coup? Well, a coup is generally a way of taking a bad situation and figuring out a way to get around it so that you can still conduct your business. So creating a continuity of your operations. What do these generally include? These generally include a communication plan. So who are you going to talk to, under what conditions, and why? So what are the conditions that create these problems? It usually includes an order of succession, activation protocols, and then like what conditions would trigger a coup? Maybe a natural disaster, a technology failure. So if you had your internet go out for a period of time during an election. It might also be a criminal event, so you might have a bomb scare or an actual criminal, like an active shooter kind of situation. Those are all great events to build a coup around. And just be prepared. Who do I talk to under various conditions? Who do I need to make aware? Who are my first calls? That kind of thing, so that you can build some security planning around some of your more important events in your election process. And obviously, when to do this is pretty specific to a scenario, so that's the way you build that. The University of Minnesota has very good operations plans, which I've linked to there, which might be worth looking at just as a kind of understand how a coup might be built. A newer area that I think is a great way to extend your security is through procurement. So when you're doing an RFP, you should really be looking at a number of different questions with your potential vendor or equipment provider. So you should be looking at past performance. Do they take security and prioritize it? Where is their location of operations? Who are their primary investors? Are there investors from China and Russia? You probably should avoid them if that's true. You can build into your contract that the people who are going to be working on your particular operation are qualified to do that, and that they themselves have had background checks, and that they adhere to basic security protocols when they're developing software. Supply chains, this is a new thing that's become much more relevant recently. Is your vendor knowing and understanding, evaluating their own supply chain? And then something that we do here in Colorado is that we ask our vendors in their contracts to allow our team to work with outside testers to evaluate security vulnerabilities in the equipment that we purchase and the software that we purchase. The CIS, Center for Internet Security, has a great procurement guide that they just released in the last couple of months. I really encourage you to do that. You're all going to need to go to RFPs on a pretty regular basis. Start incorporating this language. Okay, one more poll. We're going to ask, do you do these security protocols? And check all that apply. So you can check, like, don't just pick one. You can pick any or click all of the ones that apply to you. And we'll kind of walk through these, and at the end we'll see all the protocols that you and your office are doing. So first thing, training. So you might recognize that guy. That's Matt Masterson. You're going to hear from him here in a minute. He was doing a security training. I got a good picture of him. States should consider certifying personnel, and if they're not certifying personnel, that doesn't mean that you as a local election administrator can't build election security into your courses, into your training of both your personnel and your election judges. So what kind of security should you build into your certification program? General security, phishing awareness. This is really important. This is the way that the Democrats were attacked in 2016 during the election, through a phishing campaign. Voter registration database security. Tabletop exercise. That picture right there that you're seeing is from a tabletop exercise that we did last year in Colorado that I think was very successful. People seem to really get a lot out of it. And then do follow-up tests. Once you've advised people as to how to do a phishing campaign, or how to avoid a phishing campaign, and how your voter registration database security should work, then go back and test people. Ask them follow-up questions. Go and check to make sure that they're logging out of their computers every time they're leaving their workstation. So that's very important. And then these last things, which I kind of were the basis of those questions. Are you doing complicated and frequently changed passwords? You should consider multi-factor authentication. That looks like about a third of you do some multi-factor. I guess I have to take out the no answers. So it's actually much more than, it's about over half or thereabouts are doing multi-factor authentication. Definitely look at doing criminal background checks for people that are using your critical election systems. Evaluate whether or not they've committed fraud or if they've done some election related violations in the past. That's something that can easily be looked at through a criminal background check. It takes a little time. It's tough to administer, but it's important. Removable storage. Always reformat your thumb drives or purchase those password encrypted thumb drives. I've got one that I've been using here for the last couple of months. They're really easy to use. They cost a little bit more, but having that password on there is important. And then build a community of security with folks like the National Guard, your state DHS, FBI. Get to know those folks. They know a lot about security and can be very helpful in kind of creating that culture of security. And then lastly, create that culture of security by testing your employees, your voter registration system users. Discuss security on a regular basis. The key is if you make it important, it will be important to them. So be a leader and lead them into a security culture. So those were the basic things that were sort of non-cybersecurity related. I know if you have any questions, we're going to pose those at the end, so hold on to those. And with that, I'll pass it back to Doug.
Thank you, Judd. I actually, slight change of plan. I have one question that I wanted to go ahead and ask now.
Sure.
I have a question. So how do you move trusted build from one place to another if not by Postal Service, UPS, FedEx, etc.?
The best way to do this is literally have somebody in your state office who controls your trusted build for your equipment. So you're talking about your major equipment vendor. So likely we're talking about one or more voting systems, one or more e-poll book systems that might be operating in the state. There should be somebody at that state office who is sort of overseeing the connection between your county or local election officials and those big vendors. And that person, gets in a car and drives them out and installs them themselves, or the counties or local election officials can send their equipment to the state office so that it can be installed that way. That would certainly be the preferred way to do it. I do understand logistically that that's very difficult, and especially if the state doesn't offer that as a service. But that is the preferred way to do it, because then you can explain that chain of custody. Again, it's all about that chain of custody.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Also, a bunch of people asking about the slides and the presentation. Everyone who's registered for the webinar will get a copy of the slides and a link to the recording of this presentation. Several people very excited about the links that you have hidden in your slides there, Judd, and I think we'll be very excited to click out to those.
Once you get the actual slides, you'll be able to click those. Sorry, you can't do it while we're watching it.
No worries. We want them listening here. So, well, speaking of listening here, let me turn it over to our next guest, Matt Masterson. Matt is another person who has been in and around the election business for many, many years, first in his home state of Ohio, and then as first a staff member and then a commissioner at the Election Assistance Commission in Washington, D.C., including a stint as chairman of that agency. He's now working with the Department of Homeland Security as a cybersecurity advisor and a really key player in the agency's work to protect the election system nationwide. Matt is also a featured player in our Introduction to Cybersecurity course at the University of Minnesota, which I will again be teaching in the fall. And is someone who is smart not just about cybersecurity generally, but about what it means to the men and women who do elections day to day across the country. And so we are now delighted to have with us Mr. Matt Masterson. Matt, you there?
Thanks, Doug. I appreciate it, and thank you, Humphrey School and the fine folks in Minnesota for allowing me to do this. Judd has teed this up so nicely for us. Physical security and cybersecurity are intertwined. The way we view it, as you can see here at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, is that you can't have one without the other. Cybersecurity threats can impact infrastructure and physical security, and vice versa. And so your policies, procedures have to be holistic to cover all of the above. With that, I want to briefly, I have about 15 minutes, so I'll move quickly to first address the threat and an understanding of the threat, and then talk through practices and really what our goal as a community is to secure our election infrastructure from a cybersecurity side. I hate to go back to 2016. I won't dwell because election officials were focused on cybersecurity and securing their systems before 2016. We know that many of you local officials on the call today understand that. And so really the public's consciousness and understanding and really scrutiny of how we secure our elections really increased in 2016. Obviously, there was a high-profile case in Illinois where a nation-state actor targeted and exfiltrated data from the state of Illinois voter registration database. This is significant, obviously, for multiple reasons, but perhaps most importantly, because it really raised the public understanding of the significance of the threat and that election systems were, in fact, being targeted by sophisticated actors. But the reality is that it's not just these nation-state threats that target election systems. What we know from getting into this business early, I just got to note that the audio is fading in and out, so I'll try to talk loudly and directly into the microphone here. What we know is that cybersecurity and election systems have been targeted for some time. This is a screenshot from a Board of Elections website that had their website defaced by ISIS. So you're talking about a terrorist organization that chose to use a Board of Elections website to push their propaganda. Imagine the impact on public perception, on public faith in the elections process, if on election day your website displayed this type of propaganda. What plans do you have in place? What backups do you have in order to respond? And what communications policies do you have in place to respond if someone were to do this? I will tell you, website facing is not difficult and can have a large impact, even though we know it has no impact on the actual integrity of the election or votes. And so understanding what are my risks, what system do I own and operate, what are my, are you still unable to hear? I apologize. You need to jump in.
I think for some reason your audio, I don't know if your bandwidth is going up and down or your firewall is particularly vigilant about audio, but you're
well, that's disappointing.
so yeah, I did do the best you can. Just aim that voice at the mic and we'll power through.
Oh, okay, I will talk slower and perhaps that will help too. So anyway, the point is that these attacks can come in multiple fronts. In fact, there doesn't necessarily need to be actual targeting of an elections infrastructure to raise questions. Many of you may be familiar with Knox County, Tennessee, and the reports of their election night reporting site going down on election night. Whether or not this was a distributed denial of service attack, the reality is the perception and response by the public was one of questions about what happened, whether a malicious attack, and is the integrity of the process in place. And so every election official needs to understand how would I respond if this takes place. If my election night reporting site goes down, there's the question of how do I get it back up and running, but also how do I communicate with the public about the fact that these are unofficial results, it has no impact on the integrity, and what backups do I have in place to maintain the integrity of the process. Ransomware. Many of you may be familiar with the city of Atlanta being targeted with a ransomware attack that found many of the city's services and support. Recently, Baltimore was also hit with a ransomware attack. The reality is that ransomware is on the rise. It is used by actors of all sorts in order to make money or take down valuable systems, and are targeted frequently at times of most need so that they can make most money. So you can imagine a scenario where we're in and around election time, within the early voting window perhaps, and your system is targeted with a ransomware attack where you have no access to any of your data. Frustrating with the audio. With any of the data that you need in order to run the election. And so what is your response plan? Do you have backups of all necessary data, not just voter registration data, but other necessary data in order to run the election? Have you tested those backups in which you know they will work when you need them? Because the reality is that cyber attacks are not just impactful from the standpoint of public perception or confidence in the process, have real monetary impacts. The city of Atlanta, the estimates are anywhere between $9 to $11 million that has cost the city of Atlanta. Working with local election officials and state election officials, that you all are already under-resourced, and the cost to recover from these types of attacks, if you are not prepared, if you do not have backups, if you have not tested those backups, is incredibly high. A friend of mine in Ohio used to say, if you think a good election is expensive, you should see a bad one. There are very real costs that impact with cyber events like a ransomware attack. And ransomware is frequently targeted at mid to small county levels where the actors assume that there is little to no planning or resources to recover. It is not just restricted to large metropolitan areas, but in fact frequently targeted at mid to small organizations that have trouble recovering in the hopes that they will pay the ransom. So as we move towards 2020, the reality is public, many of you are already getting asked, okay, 2018 seems to have gone smoothly. What are you doing for 2020? Are we ready? What steps have you taken since 2016 to secure your systems? What layers of resilience, both that ability to detect but recover from a cyber attack, are in place in order for you to respond? All of you will be getting those questions. All of you have been getting those questions, and it's incumbent on all of us to be able to explain to our voters what steps we've taken to improve the overall security of the process. Really, what we're trying to do is impossible, which is to anticipate what the next headline may be, whether it's a ransomware attack on a county, whether it's a targeted denial of service attack on an election night, whether it's an attempt to steal voter registration data or otherwise. There will be more incidents. The reality is, if you run IT systems or rely on IT systems, you will be impacted by a cyber attack at one point or another. And the question is, how prepared are you to respond, and what procedures and policies do you have in place that you have exercised now in order to respond? I love this slide also, just for what it's worth, because the focus is usually on the guy holding the grasshopper, but to me, the Fed Up Patty Skill aerobics instructor is a much more relatable headline. So who is it? Who's targeting election infrastructure? What's the nature of the threat? Again, nation-state actors are most frequently the ones referenced or cited. They get the most attention, but the reality and what we saw throughout 2018 across areas of critical infrastructure is that criminals, just black hat hackers, perhaps politically motivated groups, there's just general targeting of IT infrastructure to see where vulnerabilities lie. So literally, people are out there scanning, looking for unlocked doors, open systems to exploit those vulnerabilities in order to either, for financial gain, brag about it on the internet, gain reputation and fame, cause distrust in the process. The reality is election infrastructure is a target, and that all of you will do see targeting of your systems on a regular basis. Typical attacks that we see, and these are common, if you're not familiar with these, become familiar. First and most prevalent is spear phishing or social engineering, trying to get employees or members of the election organization to click on a link, open an attachment, go to a website that has malicious content in order to gain access to your systems. Because if they gain access to one system, they can begin then to work to gain access to others. And the reality is, in any cyber operation, in any IT operation, the weakest link is always human. So the most common exploit is taking advantage of humans. So if you haven't trained, if you haven't prepared, if you haven't done phishing training and awareness, you need to do so, because it is the most common way to exploit and gain access to systems. Have you taken steps to isolate the systems that are most in need of access to the internet? So for instance, your customer support, voter support folks should be separate from those who need access to more sensitive data. SQL injection is something we saw in 2016, taking advantage of online forums in order to access databases. And then the information operations, which we continue to see. The desire to undermine confidence in the process, call into question the integrity in order to undermine democracy. This is a typical elections office, and I like to share this one to recognize how complex your jobs are, but also provide you a visualization of the fact that you are complex IT system managers. In many counties, the elections office is the most complex and largest IT operation per number of systems. So you all run complex IT operations and manage complex IT systems with multiple dependencies. Understanding what systems you run, what architecture you have, what assets you have, how many systems, not just voting systems, but PCs, e-poll books, printers, these are all IT systems that you manage and rely on. In the end, our goal is to identify, detect, respond, and recover. Lots of attention falls on the protect side of this, but the reality is you cannot protect your systems from everything all the time, particularly in an under-resourced environment like elections. And so our goal has to be also be able to detect if there is an issue and have in place those plans for respond and recovery. The number one thing every election office should have is a incident response plan, a cyber incident response plan that lays out how you would respond, who you would contact in order to recover, what backup systems you have in place, and how you communicate with the public. I have found that most elections organizations are very mature in their ability to respond and recover because of the contingency planning election officials naturally do. So in the end, what we're trying to do is identify those things that matter most, what systems and data are of most value to you that are under your control, and take the steps to protect those systems, to detect when there's a problem with those systems, and respond and recover. You all have limited money, but also limited time. Every day we're closer to another election, and so that ability to identify that mesh point of those things that matter most, that are under your control, and protect those systems and data is most important. So what steps can you take? What can you do? The first is we see 80+% of cyber incidents are caused by an actor exploiting a known vulnerability. So a system isn't patched, a system is no longer supported, you're running outdated hardware or software, and therefore already known vulnerabilities exist in your system and are being exploited. The reality is most bad actors are looking for the weakest link to exploit. And so if you have a regular patching schedule, if you're working with your IT department to update software, firmware, hardware, you're mitigating many of the known vulnerabilities, limiting your attack surface. Strengthening your passwords, Judd already touched on this. If you do not have two-factor authentication in place for your valuable system, you get it in place now. It is an expectation. Managing the risk that is posed by password exploits and using two-factor authentication is critical. Network segmentation, so ensuring that only those folks who need access to the most valuable data have it, and that the other areas of the office are not connected or are not broadly used. So for instance, again, your customer service, voter rep, not laying in the same segment of your network as the person accessing valuable voter registration data is critical. Having an incident response plan, I touched on it. One thing you walk away from here is having in place an incident response plan and exercising that plan regularly so you know how you'll respond. And replacing unmaintainable equipment. Again, mitigating those known vulnerabilities from age equipment. I would add that conducting training, particularly around phishing or exploiting the humans in your office, is also critical. Awareness leads to better cybersecurity, and so I encourage you to take advantage of resources to do that. We have some resources. First, DHS has vulnerability scanning available to all elections office for free. This is a passive scan of your outward-facing websites and networks looking for known vulnerabilities. You're issued a report on a weekly basis that you can use to both patch and mitigate those vulnerabilities. And it's simple, it's easy, and it's free, and it'll help you mitigate those known vulnerabilities that most actors manage. Remote penetration testing is a service we offer for free, where a team of folks here at DHS will remotely try to access your systems and offer you a report of vulnerabilities they discovered. This takes place over 2 to 3 weeks, looking for known vulnerabilities and then issuing you that report. And then phishing campaign assessment, again, a free assessment from DHS where we'll.
Hey Matt, it's Doug.
Yeah,
we're losing you.
Just your questions, Doug.
Your audio is falling apart. I do want to. I'm going to go ahead. Matt was going to talk about the Election Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center, EI-ISAC. Kate, could we push the poll on EI-ISAC? And the question is your jurisdiction a member of the EI-ISAC? And while you're answering that, I know Matt could tell you more, but the EI-ISAC is the one way that members of the election infrastructure community can get news and updates about best practices, current threats, and other ways to protect themselves in the current and ever-evolving threat environment. It's really good not just for stopping the bad, but also promoting the good. A lot of the terms that Matt's used today, like multi-factor authentication, trusted build, and the like, many of those are explained by EI-ISAC through really useful materials. And actually, Judd, I've got you here on the phone. Could you jump on and, from the election community's perspective, talk about EI-ISAC and what it can do?
Sure. At this point, all 50 states are a member of the EI-ISAC, and I believe we're at like 1,500 to 2,000 election jurisdictions that are members at this point. So if you're not a member of EI-ISAC, it's really easy to do. Go ahead and go to the EI-ISAC webpage. So just type in Elections Infrastructure ISAC. And you'll see right there on the front page, it'll be a how do I become a member? And you fill in a couple of different boxes and they send you an invite. Oh, and it sounds like Matt might be back on.
Yes, I apologize, and I apologize to those on the call. Just quickly, I know we're going to questions, but on the EI-ISAC, as Judd was mentioning, it is free. It is our way of sharing information across the election infrastructure. All you need to do to register is type in EI-ISAC into your search engine, and it'll pull up the registration page right there. Again, a free service for all of you. If you have not registered, it is how we share information both generally about threats, but also specific threat information. So technical indicators that we have information about, targeting areas of IT infrastructure that we push out to the elections community, and it is election specific. So all of the information is tailored for and to election officials, whether it's the general information or the specific threat information. And so there is no harm and no reason not to join the EI-ISAC to receive the information you need to maintain operational awareness and protect your systems moving forward. And again, I apologize for the audio difficulties. I will just skip ahead just to share quickly our priorities, and all you need to get out of this is DHS throughout this year is out and about at every elections conference we can get to. If you have a conference for us to attend, we want to meet with and engage with local election officials to understand your needs, what support services and information we can provide in order to help you manage manage risk to your systems. And so please reach out. Here's my contact information. Email me anytime. It is my job to work with you as local election officials. I see several folks not sure about whether they're EI ISAC members. We can provide that information for you and get you registered when you need to. So please sign up for that and please reach out to me. And with that, again, I'll apologize for the audio difficulties and turn it over to Doug.
Yeah, and Matt, real quick, if someone is not sure if their jurisdiction is a member, there's really no harm in going and registering again, right? And the folks at your end will figure out if that community is already a member or if that person is already registered?
That's correct, yes.
Good. I actually, folks, I got through the questions for the time being. I will let those of you who are on the line who might have a question or two a moment to pop on. Let me ask both of you, starting with Matt, what's one thing that folks might not realize they need to do that they should do today, right now, after turning off this webinar to protect themselves from what's going on out there?
Yeah, to me, the number one thing folks can do is, one, to stay informed by becoming an EI ISAC member, which we've hit hard. But then the second is to understand what assets and how your network is set up. So going and meeting with whoever supports you from an IT side to understand what systems are on my network, what systems can access my network, and how can I mitigate risk. The most often exploits that we see is an actor getting into one system that may or may not be related to their eventual target, and then working their way to, for instance, the election system. So most often actors aren't going to try to walk in the front door, but in fact use the side door or back door through a county network or other available network, so a third-party vendor or otherwise, in order to get to the data that they want. So understanding what assets you have and where your risk lies in your network is the most critical assessment you can do. And DHS can help you do that. We do an architecture review where one of our cybersecurity advisors will come out and work with you to understand those risks.
And isn't it true that that sometimes a county or local election office will get hit with something like ransomware or another kind of attack, not because they're a county election office, but because they're affiliated with a county? That ransomware doesn't usually attack one particular agency. It usually hits an entire jurisdiction, yes?
That is absolutely correct. That they're looking to target entities as a whole, so the entire county IT network. And so the elections office may not be the specific target, but will be impacted by the ransomware attack or other attack. And one thing we have seen that's kind of a fun anecdote is in places where we've seen a ransomware attack where a county election office is impacted, most often the election office is the first one back up and operating. One, because they generally have contingency plans, and two, because the elections community has come and helped support them. And that was the case in Baltimore, where other county officials came out and supported the Baltimore folks to get them back up and running.
And then finally on that point, and I know this is something we covered in the cybersecurity course that you worked with, having a good backup system is really important, but practicing restoring a backup is just as important. It's one thing to be backing up regularly, it's another thing to be able to use that backup when something bad happens, correct?
Yeah, absolutely correct. We see a lot of times that folks take backups, but have not tested the backups, and when the time comes to have to use them, they don't work, either because of a data formatting issue or some other issue that doesn't allow the data to be restored. And so practicing and using those backups on a regular basis is really critical, because when the time comes, you need to know they're going to work.
Wonderful. Thank you, Matt. Thank you so much, Judd and Matt. Really quickly to everybody, I want to thank you for joining us today. I just want to give you a really quick 60-second rundown through the Certificate in Election Administration. This is an online program that we offer to folks across the country and around the world. Our mission is simple. It's to identify, recruit, and train the next generation of election officials in the United States of America. You can get an academic certificate at both the graduate and undergraduate level. We understand that some folks in the community have undergraduate degrees, but not everyone does, you can still get a university accredited certification for either a graduate or undergraduate certificate through the University of Minnesota. Three audiences, obviously current election officials. We also have lots of students, graduate and undergraduate, who are interested in exploring election administration, and then folks from adjacent professions, lawyers, designers, technologists, what have you, who either want to enter the field or learn more about it so that they can do their jobs better. This is the full range of courses that we offer. The ones we're going to offer this fall are a survey in election administration, which was really just an introduction to the election process. One on election design with Dana and Dana Chisnell and Whitney Quesenberry for the Center of Civic Design. It's really the only course of its kind in election design. Voter participation with Astrid Garcia Ochoa of the Future of California Elections, which focuses on outreach to traditionally underrepresented communities and efforts to bring more folks into the electoral process. And then finally, cybersecurity and elections, which is a really basic introduction to some of the topics you've heard today, things like threat modeling, multi-factor identification, the whole critical infrastructure scheme for elections and what have you. If you are interested and want to learn more, we are accepting applications. The deadline is August 1st. It's a pretty simple application. We just need a resume, a short personal statement, and college transcripts if you have an undergraduate degree. And if you have more questions, you can click on this link, which will be in the PowerPoint, or contact my colleague, Lee Chittenden, at the address on your screen. I want to thank the over 250 of you who joined us today. This has been an incredibly popular webinar. I'm under no illusion that you all came to hear me. I especially want to thank Judd Choate and Matt Masterson for their time today. I also want to tip my cap to the incredibly resourceful Kate Connors at the University of Minnesota for making the technology work and patching Matt through on a cell phone when the computer audio didn't work. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me as well. I'm at dchapin@umn.edu. But with that, I want to thank you all for joining us. I want to wish you the best of luck as the 2019 and 2020 elections come forward, and we'll hope to see you someday soon in the Certificate for Election Administration. Thank you so much.